What if I told you that the United States of America, a global superpower, almost never existed? That it was nearly wiped off the map before it even began, all because of starvation, botched land grabs, and a colony that vanished without a trace? This is the chaotic, brutal, and almost accidental story of how England colonized North America. And it didn't begin with noble dreams of liberty. It began with poverty, overcrowded prisons, and a desperate attempt to solve England's social crisis. In 1584, a man named Richard Hakluyt laid out a bold plan: send England's homeless, jobless, and restless to the New World. Colonization, he claimed, would not only benefit England but also please God by rescuing America from Spanish Catholic control. But behind the religious rhetoric was a harsh truth. England needed a pressure valve for its poor, and America seemed like the answer. Queen Elizabeth, ever the strategist, didn't rush to plant flags and build settlements. Instead, she launched a shadow war using sea dogs, pirates like John Hawkins and Francis Drake, who raided Spanish ships under the guise of exploration. They looted gold, terrorized colonies, and enraged Spain. When England executed the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots, King Philip II of Spain declared war. He sent the most powerful fleet the world had ever seen, the Spanish Armada, 130 ships strong, with 18,000 soldiers set to crush England's navy. But the English had faster ships, smarter tactics, and a stroke of luck. A massive storm ripped through the Armada, wrecking Spain's chance at victory. England emerged as the unexpected naval powerhouse, and the seas were now open for colonization. But success didn't come easy. In 1587, England tried establishing a colony on Roanoke Island. Led by John White, it seemed promising, until White returned to find it eerily deserted. No people, no signs of struggle, just the word Croatoan carved into a tree. The colony had vanished, and to this day, no one knows what happened. Still, England didn't give up. In 1606, King James approved a new venture, the Virginia Company. 3 ships, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery, set sail for the American coast. What they established in 1607 would become the first permanent English settlement, Jamestown. But permanence came at a price. Within a few years, 90% of the settlers were dead. Disease, starvation, and freezing winters tore through the colony, and they were utterly unprepared for the brutal reality of survival. The only thing that saved them? The Powhatan tribe, native people who knew how to live off the land and generously helped the sick and starving colonists. But even that fragile peace didn't last. More settlers arrived. Supplies ran low, tensions rose, sporadic fighting broke out. And then, just as things seemed hopeless, a twist. John Rolfe, one of the colonists, married Pocahontas, daughter of the Powhatan chief. This brief alliance brought calm and tobacco. Rolfe had discovered a way to cultivate a highly addictive strain of tobacco that Europeans couldn't get enough of. By 1617, England was importing over 15 million pounds of tobacco per year. The colony had gone from near extinction to booming enterprise almost overnight. But prosperity came with blood. In 1622, Powhatan's brother launched a massive surprise attack, killing 347 settlers in one day. The English responded with brutal vengeance, wiping out villages and pushing forward with total domination. The days of mutual cooperation were over. And this wasn't entirely new for the English. They had practiced these same tactics years earlier during their conquest of Ireland. In both cases, they abandoned assimilation for eradication. They didn't want to live alongside the natives. They wanted the land. And so disease, war, and genocide swept across the region, devastating the native population. Colonization was no longer a hopeful experiment. It was conquest. Colony after colony followed Jamestown's example. Virginia expanded. Then Massachusetts. Then Maryland, Pennsylvania, and the rest. Eventually, 13 colonies stretched across the eastern seaboard. But here's the kicker. None of it might have happened if tobacco hadn't saved Jamestown. Without that one cash crop, the colony likely collapses, and with it, England's dream of a new world empire. No colony, no expansion, no 13 United States. The United States of America as we know it might have never formed. All because of a plant. All because of a storm. All because of desperation. The story of English colonization wasn't clean or heroic. It was messy, violent, and fueled by a series of near disasters. And yet, somehow, it worked. Which leaves us with one haunting question. What if any part of it had gone differently? What if that storm had never hit the Spanish Armada? What if the Powhatan had chosen to drive the colonists out instead of feeding them? What if John Rolfe's experimental tobacco crop had failed? History teetered on a razor's edge, and for every success there were countless failures buried beneath the soil. Bermuda, for instance, became a colony only after the Sea Venture shipwrecked en route to Jamestown in 1609. A disaster that inadvertently delivered desperately needed supplies and settlers to the struggling colony. It wasn't strategy. It was survival through chaos. Even the Mayflower voyage, which would later be mythologized as a noble journey of religious freedom, was anything but orderly. The Pilgrims didn't even land where they intended. They were blown off course, arriving far north of the Virginia territory they were aiming for. Half of them died during the first winter. Without the help of the Wampanoag tribe, they too would have perished. And yet again, a fragile alliance was formed, only to later be shattered by mistrust, broken treaties, and bloodshed. By the mid-1600s, the colonies had become a complex patchwork of ambition, exploitation, religious zeal, and raw survival instinct. Puritans in New England created tight-knit theocratic societies, while settlers in the South turned their plantations into engines of profit, fueled increasingly by enslaved labor. As the Atlantic slave trade expanded, so too did the dark underbelly of the colonial economy. The same ships that once carried hopeful settlers now transported human cargo from Africa, transforming the colonies into profit machines built on oppression. The brutal irony? The colonies that once offered an escape from English tyranny began replicating a new version of it. This time, not against kings, but against entire peoples. Native Americans, African slaves, and even indentured Europeans were crushed under the weight of this expanding empire. Still, the colonies grew. Boston became a center of commerce and rebellion. Philadelphia emerged as a hub of culture and intellect. Charleston flourished through its port and slave markets. But none of this happened overnight. It was slow, often accidental, and riddled with contradiction. Colonists who demanded freedom from English rule had no issue denying it to others. Their cries of liberty rang hollow against the backdrop of plantation fields and reservation boundaries. And yet, these tensions, these moral hypocrisies, would eventually spark revolutions. Because as England imposed stricter controls, taxes, and trade restrictions, the very colonies it had built began to resist. They had been born in hardship, forged in chaos, and raised on independence. They didn't see themselves as subjects anymore. They saw themselves as something new, a new people on a new land with a new destiny. And destiny had a way of shaping even the most unlikely beginnings. From the mystery of Roanoke to the smoldering tobacco fields of Virginia, every misstep, every gamble, and every brutal decision laid the groundwork for what was to come. A revolution, a nation, a global superpower that almost didn't happen. The story of English colonization in North America isn't just a footnote in history. It's a twisted origin myth, where survival trumped ideals and fortune favored the desperate. And if just one storm had missed, one seed had failed, or one alliance had fractured too soon, then perhaps the most powerful country in the modern world would have remained nothing more than a forgotten dream carved into a tree. Croatoan.